Hey, before we start, if something's been sitting heavy on you tonight, you can leave it in the comments. You don't have to explain it. Just set it down. Someone else, scrolling through at 3 in the morning, might read it and feel less alone. That's enough. Where are you right now? What time is it where you are? I'd love to know. Drop your city and the hour. It's strange and kind of beautiful how many time zones end up here together. If this is your first time, stay a while. Subscribe if you want to come back. We do this often. Now settle in. Get comfortable. Let your shoulders drop. Tonight, we're going a long way back. Close your eyes for a moment. Run your tongue along the back of your teeth. Feel that. Has been part of the human blueprint for over 300,000 years. The tongue that touches it is made of muscles that evolved in the same rough shape long before that. Your mouth, right now, is older than every language ever spoken. Older than every song. Older than fire kept in a clay pot. Now open your eyes if you want, or keep them closed. Either way, the body you're lying in tonight is not new. It is an ancient machine. And the strange thing, the thing that should keep you up at night if tonight weren't for sleeping, is this. That ancient machine came with a brain that could do everything yours can do. And it had that brain for 250,000 years before anyone thought to build a wall. Tonight, we're going to the long silence. The gap. 290,000 years of it. Somewhere around 300,000 years ago, in what is now Morocco, in a place called Jebel Irhoud, where the air smells of hot limestone and dry scrub, a group of people lived and died who had brains the same size as yours. Same folds. Same general wiring. If you cleaned one of their skulls and set on a laboratory table next to a modern one, you would struggle to tell them apart. And then, nothing. Or what looks like nothing. For 290,000 years, these fully modern humans left almost no trace of what we would call civilization. No cities. No writing. No pyramids. No bronze. No glass. No roads. Then, roughly 10,000 years ago, everything changed at once. Walls went up. Grain was stored. Sheep were penned. Laws were scratched into clay. And within a few thousand years, an evolutionary eye blink, we went from mud brick villages to skyscrapers, satellites, and nuclear warheads. The question is not why civilization happened. The question, the one that hums quietly under all of recorded history like a low electrical current, is what were we doing for all that time before? What were fully modern human brains doing for 250,000 years? Were they waiting? Were they failing? Were they doing something we've forgotten how to see? There is a smell that will matter later. The smell of ochre ground into paste, mixed with animal fat, pressed onto the wall of the cave by fingers not so different from yours. Hold that. It comes back. The skull was found in 1961, but it wasn't understood until 2017. A mining operation at Jebel Irhoud, about 100 kilometers west of Marrakesh, had been blasting through limestone for years. The workers were looking for barium, a soft, silvery metal used in drilling fluid. What they found instead were bones. A jawbone. Fragments of a cranium. Stone tools flaked from flint in a style called levallois, a method that requires planning, spatial reasoning, and a steady hand. The bones were originally dated to around 40,000 years ago, which made them interesting but not extraordinary. They seemed to fit the existing timeline. Modern humans evolved in East Africa around 200,000 years ago and slowly spread outward. Simple story. Clean story. But the simple story was wrong. In 2017, a team led by Jean-Jacques Hublin returned to Jebel Irhoud with thermoluminescence dating, a method that measures the last time crystalline minerals and burned flint were heated. The flint tools found alongside the skulls had been in fires. Old fires. And when the lab results came back, the room went quiet. 300,000 years. Not 200,000. 300,000. The skulls were a full 100,000 years older than the oldest previously accepted Homo sapiens fossils. And they weren't from East Africa. They were from a far northwest corner of the continent, closer to the Atlantic than to the Rift Valley. The sound you might imagine in that lab. The particular hush of people staring at a number on a screen that rewrites what they thought they knew, that silence carried weight. It was the sound of a gap opening. A gap of time so large that everything we call human history could fit inside it 30 times over. Let the wind outside your window be whatever wind it wants to be right now. Just listen to it for a breath. Here's what the skulls told us. The brain case, the part of the skull that houses the brain, was already modern in volume. roughly 1,400 cubic centimeters. That's within the normal range for people alive today. The face was flatter, more retracted than earlier hominins, with a brow ridge that was reduced but not yet gone. If you saw this person from a distance, wrapped in modern clothing, you might not look twice. The stone tools found at the same layer told their own story. Levallois flaking is not simple. You don't pick up a rock and bash it. You study the stone. You read its internal geometry, its planes of fracture, its hidden weaknesses. You remove flakes in a precise sequence, each one preparing the surface for the next, until the final strike releases a single, symmetrical blade. It requires foresight. It requires holding a plan in your mind across multiple steps. Your phone screen, if you're reading on one, was designed by a brain using essentially the same cognitive architecture that planned those flint strikes. The tools are different. The thinking is not. And here's where the gap opens. Between 300,000 years ago and roughly 12,000 years ago, when the first permanent settlements began to cluster in the Fertile Crescent, there's an almost inconceivable stretch of time during which anatomically modern humans existed, thought, dreamed, suffered, loved, and died without producing what archaeologists can easily recognize as progress. No writing, no metal, no permanent architecture, no agriculture at any scale that left a mark. The entire span from the construction of the Great Pyramid to this very moment, tonight, wherever you are lying, is about 4,600 years. The gap we're talking about is 60 times longer than that. 60. The sound of a fire cracking in the dark. The pop and hiss of resin in greenwood. Imagine it. Now, the obvious question and the wrong one is, were they stupid? Were these early humans somehow lesser? Were they waiting for some mutation, some spark of genius that hadn't yet flickered on? No. And we know this not from philosophy, but from bone, from tools, from pigment. In Blombo's cave, on the southern coast of South Africa, overlooking an ocean that would have been colder then, rougher, full of kelp and seals. In that cave, someone sat down roughly 100,000 years ago and carved a geometric pattern into a piece of ochre. Cross-hatched lines. Regular. Deliberate. Abstract. Abstract. 100,000 years ago. That's not the behavior of a mind waiting to be switched on. That's the behavior of a mind already fully lit, doing something with symbols, with pattern, with meaning, and doing it a solid 90,000 years before the first known cave paintings in Europe. The ochre itself, iron oxide, red-brown, the color of dried blood, had been ground into powder, mixed with fat or marrow. This wasn't accidental mark-making. Someone prepared materials. Someone chose this stone, sat in the low light of that cave with the sound of surf grinding against the shore outside, and deliberately inscribed a pattern that served no obvious survival purpose. That matters. Sit with it for a moment. Whatever that pattern meant, whether it was counting or ownership or ritual or something we have no word for, it means that symbolic thought, the foundation of everything we call culture, was present in the human mind tens of thousands of years before it produced anything we'd recognize as a civilization. The brain was ready. The capacity was there. So why the wait? Rain on stone. The particular sound of water running down a rock face in the dark. Not a waterfall, just a trickle. A slow, patient sound. Part of the answer is that we've been asking the wrong question. We look at the gap and see absence. We see 290,000 years of nothing. But that's because we've defined something so narrowly that only cities and writing qualify. What if those 290,000 years weren't empty? What if they were full of something we've only recently developed the tools to detect? Consider what the archaeological record actually shows when you stop looking for buildings and start looking for behavior. At Pinnacle Point, also in South Africa, humans were systematically harvesting shellfish by 164,000 years ago. Not just picking up whatever washed ashore, systematically targeting specific species at specific tidal intervals. That requires knowledge of lunar cycles. It requires planning across time. It requires teaching, because no single human lifespan is long enough to learn all the tidal patterns by trial and error alone. Someone was passing knowledge forward. Someone was teaching. At a site called Border Cave, in the Lebombo Mountains between South Africa and Eswatini, a small notch bone was found, a baboon fibula, about 43,000 years old, with 29 incised marks along its length. It looks, to modern eyes, remarkably like a tally. Like counting. Like math. And at Sabudu Cave, in KwaZulu-Natal, researchers found evidence that humans were constructing compound adhesives, mixing plant gum with red ochre and animal fat to half-stone points onto wooden shafts by at least 70,000 years ago. Compound adhesives. That's not instinct. That's chemistry. You have to understand that mixing specific proportions of specific materials produces a substance with properties that none of the individual ingredients possess alone. Your breath right now, notice it. You don't have to change it. Just notice that it's happening without your permission. It has been doing that all night. So the early modern humans weren't sitting in the dark waiting for history to begin. They were doing things. Complex things. Things that required teaching, memory, planning, and abstract reasoning. But here's the part that will carry us into the deeper water of this story. They did all of this without growing, without scaling up, without building permanent structures, accumulating surplus, or expanding beyond small, mobile bands of perhaps 20 to 50 individuals. For 250,000 years, humans had the cognitive hardware to build Rome. And they didn't. Not because they couldn't, but perhaps because, and this is the idea that will haunt the rest of tonight's telling, they didn't need to. Or didn't want to, or had figured out something about how to live that we, in our cities, in our noise, in our insomnia, have forgotten. The fire is lower now, just embers, the kind that give heat but no light. There's an idea in anthropology, not new, but newly respected, that the shift to agriculture and civilization was not an upgrade, not a promotion, not progress in the way we use that word when we mean better. Some researchers, following the thread first pulled by Marshall Solins in the 1960s, have argued that the hunter-gatherer life was, in many measurable ways, easier. Less work, more leisure, greater nutritional variety, fewer epidemic diseases, less social inequality. If that's true, and the evidence increasingly suggests that at least parts of it are, then the gap isn't a mystery of delay. It's a record of something that worked. 290,000 years of a way of living that sustained fully modern humans without devouring the systems that supported them. We burned through our version, the version with cities and industry and written law, in about 10,000 years, and the atmosphere is already turning against us. They lasted 30 times longer. That's not nothing. That's not absence. That's not a blank spot on the timeline waiting to be filled. That might be the longest success story our species has ever written. We just can't read it because it wasn't written down. The smell of rain on warm dust. The particular scent called petrichor, which is actually the smell of a molecule called geosmin, produced by soil bacteria, launched into the air when the first drops of rain hit dry ground. Your nose can detect geosmin at concentrations of 5 parts per trillion. That sensitivity is very, very old. It's there because your ancestors, not your recent ancestors, your deep ancestors, the ones in the gap, needed to smell rain coming. Water meant life, and you inherited their nose. Tonight, if it rains where you are, you'll smell something that 300,000-year-old humans smelled too, and your brain will respond to it the same way, with something that isn't quite a thought, more like a loosening, a release. That's the gap, talking to you in a language older than words. If you're still here, awake, half awake, it doesn't matter. You're in the right place. There's no test. There's nothing you need to remember. Somewhere right now, someone else is hearing these same words in a different time zone. Maybe it's morning for them. Maybe it's the deepest part of the night. You don't know each other, but you're sharing this strange, quiet thing together. A story about the longest chapter of what it means to be human. Let your breathing do whatever it's already doing. We'll keep walking. There is a room in the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, where the air is filtered and the temperature never changes. It smells faintly of plastic and ethanol. The lighting is the flat, humming kind, fluorescent, institutional, the sort that makes everything look like evidence. Which is appropriate, because everything in this room is. This is where ancient DNA speaks. The process begins with bone, usually a petrous bone, the small, dense pyramid of tissue behind your ear, the hardest bone in the human body. In the living, it protects the inner ear. In the dead, it protects something else, genetic material. DNA survives longer in petrous bone than almost anywhere else in the skeleton, locked inside mineral crystals like a message in a bottle thrown into deep time. A technician, gloved, masked, moving with the careful slowness of someone handling something irreplaceable, drills into the bone. The drill is small. The sound is high-pitched, almost dental. A fine powder collects. That powder contains fragments of molecules that were last assembled inside a living cell tens of thousands of years ago. Your own DNA is doing its work right now, in every cell of your body, while you listen to this. The same molecule, the same double helix, the same four-letter alphabet. The fragments in that powder and the strands in your blood are written in an identical language. The powder goes into solution. Enzymes break open what's left of the cell membranes. Magnetic beads, coated with molecules designed to grab DNA and hold it, are mixed in. A magnet pulls the beads to the side of the tube, and everything that isn't DNA gets washed away. What remains is almost nothing. Nanograms, less than the weight of a single eyelash. But it's enough. Enough to sequence. Enough to compare. Enough to ask, who were these people? And who are they related to? The wind outside that lab in Leipzig is cold and carries the smell of the Elster River. Inside, a screen fills with data. Here is what ancient DNA has told us about the gap. First, there was no single origin point. The old model, humans evolved in one spot in East Africa and spread outward like ripples from a dropped stone, is broken. The Jebel Irhoud fossils broke it, but the genetics broke it further. Studies published between 2018 and 2023 revealed that early Homo sapiens populations were spread across Africa in multiple semi-isolated groups, some in the south, some in the east, some in the west and north. They weren't one population. They were many, separated by deserts, forests, and mountain ranges, occasionally meeting and mixing when climate shifts opened corridors between their territories. Think of it as a continent of islands. Not islands of water, but islands of habitat. Green pockets separated by sand and stone. Each pocket holding a small band of humans. Each band developing its own variations, its own tool styles, perhaps its own ways of speaking and thinking. And every few thousand years, when the rains returned and the deserts bloomed, those islands reconnected. People met. Genes flowed. Ideas traveled. Then the dry times came back, and the islands separated again. This is called African multiregionalism, and it changes the picture of the gap completely. There wasn't one human story during those 290,000 years. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, playing out simultaneously across a continent 3 times the size of Europe, most of them leaving no trace we've yet found. Pause here. Feel the surface beneath you, bed, couch, floor, whatever is holding you right now. It's holding you the way the ground held them. Same gravity, same planet. The DNA tells us something else. Bottlenecks. Moments when the human population crashed. When the number of breeding individuals dropped so low that the genetic diversity of everyone alive today still bears the scars. One major bottleneck appears to have occurred around 930,000 years ago, before a species even existed, a near-extinction event in our ancestral lineage that may have reduced the breeding population to fewer than 1,300 individuals. The evidence for this comes from a method called FitCol, which reads the patterns of genetic diversity in modern populations and works backward, like reconstructing a fire from the pattern of ash. Another contraction may have occurred around 70,000 years ago, possibly linked to the eruption of Mount Toba in Sumatra, a supervolcanic event that injected so much sulfur into the stratosphere that global temperatures may have dropped by several degrees for years. The ashfall alone covered most of South Asia in a layer you could measure in centimeters. The taste of that air, sulfurous, metallite, the taste of a world dimming, would have reached Africa on high-altitude winds within weeks. Whether Toba actually caused a human bottleneck is debated. We'll get to that. But the genetics show that something squeezed us thin around that time. The diversity in your DNA right now is remarkably low for a species of 8 billion. Chimpanzees, with a global population of perhaps 300,000, have more genetic diversity than all of humanity combined. That tells you how close we came. More than once. The drill whirs again in Leipzig. Another bone. Another message. Beyond DNA, the physical record speaks in other frequencies. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica, cylinders of frozen time, pulled from glaciers up to 3 kilometers deep, contain bubbles of ancient atmosphere. Actual air from 100,000 years ago, trapped when snow compressed into ice. Scientists crack these bubbles open and measure what's inside. Carbon dioxide, methane, dust, pollen, the chemical diary of a planet. What the ice cores show, across the span of the gap, is a world in constant motion, not the stable backdrop we might imagine. The climate swung, glacial periods locking water in vast ice sheets, dropping sea levels by over 100 meters, exposing land bridges and coastal shelves are now deep underwater. Then interglacials, warm spells, sometimes warmer than today, when forests pushed north and deserts retreated. Every swing was a test. Every test required adaptation, not genetic adaptation, which is too slow, but cultural adaptation. New tools, new strategies, new places to go, new things to eat. The humans in the gap passed every test for 290,000 years. The hum of a refrigeration unit, the click of a pipette. Somewhere in a lab, a screen refreshes, and a line of nucleotides scrolls past like text in a language almost no one alive can read fluently. But a few people are learning. So the brain was modern. The body was modern. The genetic evidence shows populations spread across Africa, mixing and separating, surviving bottleneck after bottleneck, adapting to climates that shifted every few thousand years. Why, then, did it take so long for what we call civilization to emerge? The most influential answer, the one that has shaped 2 decades of research, is called the cultural accumulation model, and it has nothing to do with individual intelligence. Imagine a kitchen, not a professional kitchen. Your kitchen, or one you know well. The smell of whatever was last cooked there, garlic, maybe, or toast, or the faint sweetness of onions and butter. The drawer that sticks, the shelf where the spices are. Now imagine that every recipe you know has to be memorized. There are no cookbooks, no internet, no written notes. Every dish you can make, you learn by watching someone else make it. Your mother, your grandmother, a neighbor. If they die before they teach you, the recipe dies with them. Gone. Irrecoverable. Now imagine that your entire community is 25 people, maybe 30. That's your whole world. Among those 30 people, there are only so many minds to hold recipes, only so many hands to demonstrate techniques, only so many years of overlapping life in which knowledge can pass from one generation to the next. If the group is healthy and stable, the recipes accumulate. Each generation adds a small improvement, a new spice, a better way to grind grain, a trick with fermentation. Over centuries, the cuisine becomes rich, complex, refined. But if the group shrinks, if a drought kills half the band, if a disease takes the elders, if a conflict splits the community, recipes vanish. Not because people became stupider, because there weren't enough people left to remember everything. This is the cultural accumulation model applied to the gap. The argument, developed by researchers like Joseph Henrich at Harvard and Adam Powell at University College London, is that the critical variable was never individual brain power. It was population density, network size, the number of minds connected to each other closely enough and long enough for knowledge to accumulate faster than it was lost. Take that kitchen. Expand it. Imagine not 30 people, but 300, living in close enough proximity to trade, teach, visit, and intermarry. Now there are enough minds to hold more recipes. Enough overlap that the death of one elder doesn't erase an entire technique. Enough variation that someone, somewhere, tries something new, and if it works, it spreads. 300 becomes 3,000. Now you have specialization. Someone who does nothing but make bread. Someone who experiments only with fermentation. The recipes don't just accumulate. They branch, refine, and combine in ways that no single mind could produce. This is what happened roughly 12,000 years ago. Not a sudden spark of genius. A slow crossing of a threshold. A critical mass of connected humans, dense enough and stable enough for culture to ratchet forward faster than it decayed. The kitchen fills with steam. The smell of bread rises. And civilization begins. Not because someone suddenly became smart, but because enough smart people were finally in the same room. Close that kitchen door. Step back outside, into the older air. The accumulation model explains the timing. It explains why the same species could have modern brains for hundreds of thousands of years without producing cities. Not because the brains were insufficient, but because the social networks were too small and too fragile to sustain cumulative culture beyond a certain complexity. Small bands of hunter-gatherers, brilliant, adaptive, fully human, were like libraries with only a few shelves. They could hold a great deal. They did hold a great deal. Knowledge of hundreds of plant species, animal behaviors, weather patterns, tool-making techniques, medicinal remedies, navigational methods, and social protocols. Ethnographic studies of recent hunter-gatherer societies have documented individuals who could identify and name over 1,000 plant species and describe the specific use of each one. But the shelves had a limit. And when disaster struck, when the group shrank, when connections broke, books fell off the shelves and were not replaced. Your body knows something about thresholds. You cross them every night. There's a moment. You can't plan it, can't force it. When the accumulation of fatigue, darkness, warmth, and safety tips you from waking into sleep. You don't decide it. It happens to you. The gap worked the same way. Civilization didn't arrive because someone decided to build a city. It arrived because conditions, population, climate, geography, cross a line, and the momentum became self-sustaining. The bread is in the oven. The kitchen door is closed. The analogy has done its work. What the accumulation model gives us is a way to look at the gap without pity, without condescension. The humans of the deep past weren't failed versions of us. They were us, with smaller address books. And those smaller address books weren't a flaw. For most of the gap, they were the optimal strategy. Small mobile bands could respond to environmental change faster than any settled population. They could move when the water moved. They could shift their diet when the seasons shifted. They carried their culture in their heads and their hands, which meant they could carry it anywhere. The cost was fragility. The benefit was flexibility. For 250,000 years, the benefit outweighed the cost. A sound in the distance. Not thunder. Not yet. Just the low pressure of a system moving in. The kind of sound you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. But the kitchen model, clean as it is, doesn't explain everything. And the places where it breaks are the places where the story gets honest. The first crack is Blombos. Remember the cross-hatched ochre. 100,000 years ago. Geometric patterns, deliberately carved. That symbolic behavior. The use of marks to represent something beyond the mark itself. And symbolic behavior is supposed to be the hallmark of what archaeologists call behavioral modernity. The full suite of human cognitive abilities, including art, language, ritual, and long-range planning. If symbolic thought was present at Blombos 100,000 years ago, and if population density is the main bottleneck, then we should see a relatively steady upward ramp of cultural complexity from that point forward. More symbols, more complex tools, more evidence of trade and ritual, accumulating as populations slowly grew. But we don't see a steady ramp. We see flickers. Blombos goes bright around 100,000 years ago. Ochre, shell beads, bone tools, cross-hatched engravings. Then it goes quiet. The complex behaviors disappear from the record for tens of thousands of years. Then they reappear at different sites, at different times, in different parts of Africa. Hoasin's port, a tool industry of remarkable sophistication, small, crescent-shaped blades called segments, backed and hafted like components of a Swiss Army knife, appears around 65,000 years ago, and then vanishes from the record around 60,000 years ago. Appears, then vanishes. The accumulation model explains this. As population collapse, the shelves emptied when the bands shrank. And that's probably part of the truth. But some researchers argue it's not the whole truth. There is a slower, quieter objection. And it goes like this. What if we're not seeing absence? What if we're seeing materials that don't survive? Let that settle for a moment. Feel the weight of your own head on whatever is supporting it right now. Let it be heavier than usual. The archaeological record is not a complete record. It is a survival-biased record. Stone survives. Bone sometimes survives. Ochre survives. But wood doesn't. Bark doesn't. Woven fibers mostly don't. Animal hides don't. And the vast majority of what hunter-gatherers create across every documented society, is made from organic materials that rot, dissolve, and disappear within decades. Baskets, cordage, nets, snares, clothing, bags, shelters of bent saplings covered with hides, body paint, tattoos, hairstyles, songs, dances, stories told in the dark while the fire burned low. All of it gone. Not because it didn't exist, but because it was made of the world, and the world took it back. Imagine judging your own culture by what would survive 100,000 years. The concrete might last. Some glass. The plastics, certainly. A thought that should unsettle you. But your music? Your conversations? Your relationships? The way your grandmother laughed? Gone. And someone 100,000 years from now, sifting through the rubble, might conclude that you didn't have those things at all. That's the problem with the gap. We're looking through a keyhole at a room we can't enter, and we're describing the room based on the sliver of floor we can see. There's a further complication, and it runs deeper. The Toba catastrophe theory, the idea that the eruption of Mount Toba around 74,000 years ago nearly wiped out humanity, was a dominant narrative for 2 decades. It offered a clean explanation, a volcanic winter, lasting years, that killed off most humans and reduced the survivors to a few thousand desperate individuals huddled in coastal refugia. The genetic bottleneck we see around that time seemed to confirm it. But the confirmation has frayed. Archaeological sites in India, dated to just after the eruption, show continuous human habitation. The ash layers are there, clear, measurable, undeniable, and directly above them, in the same sediment sequence, are stone tools. People were still there. They were still working. The eruption happened, the ash fell, and life went on. Studies of ancient pollen from African lake cores around the Toba window show vegetation disturbance, but not collapse. The forest thinned. They didn't die. And if the forest survived, the people in those forests likely survived too. The genetic bottleneck may be real, but its cause may not be Toba. It may be something slower, something less dramatic. A long, grinding dry period across Africa between 80,000 and 60,000 years ago. Not a single catastrophe, but a slow tightening of the livable world. Lakes shrank, grasslands receded. The green islands got smaller and further apart. Populations didn't crash in a day. They thinned over generations. And here's where the debate stands now, in an honest, uncomfortable place. We know the brains were modern. We know the behaviors were complex, at least in flickers. We know the populations were small and fragile, subject to collapses that could erase millennia of accumulated knowledge in a generation. We know the archaeological record is biased toward materials that survive, which means we are systematically blind to most of what these people made and did. But we don't know what they thought. We don't know what they believed. We don't know what stories they told around those fires whose charcoal we carbon date in our labs. Some researchers, like the cognitive archaeologist David Lewis Williams, believe we can infer something about their inner lives from the patterns that do survive. The geometric engravings, the use of pigment, the deliberate burial of the dead. These, Lewis Williams argues, are markers of minds that experienced altered states of consciousness, trance, dreaming, the hypnagogic drift between waking and sleep. The same drift that may be pulling at you right now. Others push back. The archaeologist Lynn Wadley, who led excavations at Sabutu Cave, argues that inferring mental states from material culture is always speculative, that we should focus on what the objects tell us about practical cognition and resist the temptation to project our own inner lives on a people we can never interview. The debate is not settled. It may never be. And that, strangely, is one of the most honest things about this story. We are a species that can extract DNA from a 300,000-year-old skull, sequence its genome, and compare it to our own. We can read the chemistry of ancient air trapped in Antarctic ice. We can date a flint tool by measuring the last time its crystals saw fire. But we cannot ask the woman who carved those crosshatches at Blombos what they meant to her. The gap keeps its secrets, not because there are none, but because they were stored in the one medium that time always takes first. Memory, breath, the sound of voice in the dark, which is, if you think about it, exactly the medium you're receiving this story in right now. Someone's voice, in the dark, and when it stops, it too will leave no fossil. The rain, real or imagined, is still falling. Geosmin rises from the ground. Your ancient nose catches it, and something in your chest loosens, just a fraction. That loosening is older than language. We carry more of the gap inside us than we will ever dig out of the ground. Picture this. 70,000 years ago, the southern coast of Africa, a place that doesn't have a name yet, won't have one for another 69,000 years. The land that will someday be called the Eastern Cape. It is just before dawn. The first thing is sound. Not birdsong, not yet. The ocean. A low, constant pressure against the rocks below the cliff. A rhythm so steady it has become silence for the people who sleep here. The way your refrigerator hum disappears until someone mentions it. Like that. The sea is furniture. Then the wind shifts, and the smell arrives. Kelp. Salt. The faintly sulfurous tang of tidal pools where anemones have been breathing all night. And under that, something warmer, the banked ash of last night's fire, a scent like the ghost of smoke, not acrid anymore but soft, chalky, familiar. The smell of safety, the smell that means people are near. She wakes. We don't know her name. We will never know her name. But her bones, or bones like hers, survive in the caves along this coast. And from those bones and from the objects found beside them, we can build the edges of her mourning. She's perhaps 30. This makes her experienced, not old. Life expectancy at birth was low, dragged down by infant mortality, but those who survived childhood could live into their 60s, sometimes 70s. She has buried children. She has also raised them. The lines of her body carry both. The ground beneath her is layered bedding, sedge grasses, pulled from the marshes behind the dunes, laid down in thick mats, and replaced when they grew stale. Researchers at Sabudu Cave found these bedding layers preserved in the sediment, compressed into thin, identifiable sheets. Some layers contain traces of Cryptocarya woodii, a camphor-rich plant whose leaves repel insects. She's sleeping on bug spray, 70,000 years old. Her eyes are not open yet, but her skin is reading the world. The air on her face, cool, damp, carrying that kelp salt signature. The warmth along her left side where her youngest child is pressed against her ribs, breathing in the shallow, rapid rhythm of deep infant sleep. The faint ache in her right shoulder from yesterday's work, digging for bulbs with a weighted stick, a tool so simple it leaves almost no archaeological trace, but one that required exact knowledge of which plants grew where, which season to dig, and how deep to go. Now the birds. A fiscal shrike. A boo-boo duet. The mated pair calling and answering so quickly it sounds like one bird singing to itself. The sound is close. The birds nest in the scrub, near the cave mouth. She opened her eyes. The light is the color of the inside of a shell. Not white, not gold. A pearlescent gray-pink that lasts only minutes before the sun clears the horizon and turns everything ordinary. This light exists only here, only now, in this sliver of time between dark and day. Your own body knows this light, not visually, but chemically. Your circadian rhythm, governed by a cluster of cells behind your eyes no bigger than a grain of rice, responds to exactly this spectrum of pre-dawn light. It suppresses melatonin. It begins the slow cascade of cortisol that will, over the next hour, bring you fully into the waking world. Her body ran the same software, the same grain of rice, the same chemistry. You are closer to her than you think. She sits up. The child stirs but doesn't wake. Around her, in the shallow depression of the rock shelter, others are moving. A low murmur. Someone coughs. Someone blows on the embers and the faint glow brightens, and the smell of smoke sharpens. Fresh now, alive, the smell of combustion rather than memory. The day begins. It has been beginning like this, on this coast, in shelters like this, for longer than any calendar will ever measure. The first task is water. Not from a tap, not from a bottle, from a seep. A place where groundwater pushes through sandstone and collects in a shallow depression lined with moss. It is a 10-minute walk from the shelter, through scrub that smells of buchu and wild rosemary, along a path that isn't a path. No stones laid, no ground cleared, but a route held in shared memory, worn faintly by years of bare feet on the same soil. She carries a tortoise shell, cleaned, hollowed, the size of 2 cupped hands. It holds enough water for a child to drink. This is not primitive. This is precise. She knows this seep the way you know your kitchen. She knows that it flows more freely after rain and slows to a trickle in the dry months. She knows that the water tastes slightly different in winter, more mineral, colder, with a faint iron edge. She knows that if the sedge around the seep dies back, the water may be silting over, and she'll need to find the secondary source near the fig trees. This knowledge was not written down. It lived in her body, in her feet, which knew the path, in her tongue, which knew the taste, in her memory, which held a map of water sources across a territory that might span 50 square kilometers, a map with no paper, no ink, no coordinates, only experience, only teaching, only the voice of someone older saying, when she was small, this way, taste this, remember, feel your own tongue against the roof of your mouth. The water she carries back is cold. At the shelter, the fire is fully alive now. Someone has fed it with dry driftwood, the kind that burns hot and fast, salt-seasoned, popping with bright sparks. The heat pushes outward in a circle, and people arrange themselves around it not randomly, but in a pattern, a social geometry that anthropologists have documented in living hunter-gatherer groups, and that appears, in the arrangement of hearths and debris, in sites tens of thousands of years old. The old sit closest to the fire. Their joints ache. The warmth helps. The children orbit, close, then far, then close again, pulled by curiosity and pushed by restlessness. Food preparation begins. It is not simple. A woman, perhaps our woman, perhaps her sister, takes a handful of corms dug yesterday. They look like small, dirty onions. They are the underground storage organs of plants in the iris family, rich in carbohydrates, and they are toxic when raw. She knows this. Everyone knows this. The knowledge is so embedded it isn't even spoken. It's like knowing not to touch a hot stove. You just know. She places the corms in the ash at the edge of the fire. Not in the flame, in the ash. The heat must be gentle and sustained, not fierce. Roasting breaks down the toxic compounds. It also converts complex starches into simpler sugars, making the corms easier to digest and sweeter on the tongue. This is cooking. This is chemistry. This is knowledge accumulated over uncounted generations and transmitted without a single written word. The smell of the roasting corms is starchy, slightly sweet, with a faint bitterness underneath. Elsewhere, someone is working bone. A long bone from an antelope, struck once to fracture it lengthwise, then scraped with a stone flake to smooth the edge. The scraping sound is rhythmic. S-H-H-H-Gay, 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 a sound like a blade being drawn across leather. The bone will become an awl, a point for piercing hide, for making holes through which sinew can be threaded, for making clothing, for making bags. The awl maker is patient. The rhythm doesn't change. There is no hurry. This is important. This is perhaps the most radical difference between her world and yours. There is no hurry. There is no clock, no schedule, no notification, no deadline. The day has tasks, but the tasks are woven into the day the way breathing is woven into living. They happen, they are done with care, and there is ample time between them for sitting, for talking, for watching the sea. Ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, the San, the Hadza, the Ache, the Cone, consistently report that the average adult spends between 4 and 6 hours per day on subsistence activities. Foraging, hunting, preparing food, maintaining tools. The rest of the day is leisure, conversation, rest, play, storytelling. 4 to 6 hours. Your own workday is likely longer. The commute alone may take an hour. She doesn't know she's free. Freedom is invisible when it's all you've ever known. But she has something that you, tonight, are trying to buy back. With this audio, with this darkness, with whatever ritual of winding down brought you here. She has time. The corms are ready. She pushes them from the ash with a stick and lets them cool. The child who is sleeping against her ribs is awake now, sitting in a patch of sun near the cave mouth, watching an ant carry a seed. The child's attention is total, complete, undistracted. That child's brain is developing along the same trajectory as the brain of every child born this year in every hospital on Earth. The same windows of language acquisition opening at the same ages. The same explosion of synaptic connections between 12 and 24 months. The same need for touch, for voice, for the presence of a calm, adult body. The calm adult body. That's her. She hands a child a cooled corn. The child eats. The simple machinery of survival turns another cycle. And somewhere in the child's mind, in the hippocampus, in the prefrontal cortex, in neural networks we can map but not yet fully decode, something is being recorded. The path to the water. The smell of buchu on the trail. The taste of the corn. The sound of bone on stone. A library is being built. Shelf by shelf. The sea looks wrong. She notices it in the late afternoon, standing on the rock shelf above the beach where the shellfish beds lie exposed at low tide. She comes here often. She knows this view the way she knows her own hands. The water is pulled back. Not the normal low-tide recession. She reads tides fluently, has done since childhood, knows the rhythm of spring tides and neap tides the way you might know the rhythm of traffic on your street. This is different. The waterline has retreated further than she's ever seen it. Rocks that are always submerged are standing dry and exposed. Their surface is crusted with barnacles that are dying in the open air, clicking faintly as they close their plates against the emptiness. The sound of the barnacles. Tiny. Everywhere. A quiet, clicking panic. The wind has stopped. That's the other thing. The wind on this coast is constant. The southeaster in summer, the northwester in winter, always something moving. But now the air is still. Heavy. Warm in a way that feels physical, like a hand pressing down. Something in her body knows before her mind does. This is not language. Not reason. This is the older system, the one that tightens the muscles between the shoulder blades, that quickens the breath, that shifts the eyes to the periphery. The system that kept her ancestors alive for 200,000 years before this moment. Amygdala. Hypothalamus. Adrenaline. She turns back toward the shelter. She doesn't run, but she walks with a specific urgency that the others recognize instantly. In a group this small, you read each other the way you read weather. A change in posture is a sentence. A change in pace is a paragraph. The others look up. She says something. We don't know what language she speaks. We don't know if it's tonal, like many modern African languages. We don't know if it uses clicks, those extraordinary consonants, produced by creating a vacuum with the tongue against the palate, that are found today only in the Khoisan languages of southern Africa, and may represent some of the oldest speech sounds on Earth. But she says something, and the group moves. Not in chaos. In coordination. The young children are gathered. The old woman who can't walk fast is helped to her feet. The fire that takes effort to build, that represents hours of work and a precious, irreplaceable resource. But they go up, away from the coast, into the broken ground of the interior, where the sandstone ridges rise in steps and the vegetation thickens. The sound of feet on dry grass. The sound of a child being carried, breathing fast. The sound of the sea, behind them, doing something it should not be doing. We don't know what event this was. It might have been a tsunami. The geological record along the southern African coast shows evidence of at least one major tsunami event during the late Pleistocene, possibly triggered by a submarine landslide off the Agulhas Bank. It might have been a severe storm surge, amplified by a tidal anomaly. It doesn't matter. What matters is this. She read the signal. The signal was not written in any book. It was not broadcast on any frequency. It was written in the behavior of water and air, in the wrongness of a sea that had pulled back too far, in the stillness of a wind that should have been blowing. And she read it because she was literate in a language that has no alphabet. The language of paying attention. The language of living inside the world instead of on top of it. Your body still speaks this language, though you rarely listen. The hair that rises on your arms when something feels wrong in a room. The unease in your stomach before a conversation you're dreading. The way you sometimes know the phone is about to ring. These are not superstitions. They are the residue of 300,000 years of survival. The echoes of a time when reading the world correctly was the difference between living and dying, and the humans who read it best passed their nervous systems onto you. You inherited her vigilance. You inherited her intuition. You are lying down tonight with the same alarm system running quietly in your chest. The group climbs. The light is changing. Afternoon gold has gone amber, and the shadows of the ridgelines stretch long and dark across the slope. The air smells of feinboss, the scent of a biome that has existed here longer than any forest on Earth, older than the Amazon, A community of plants that has been burning and regrowing and burning again since before a species existed. They reach the high ground. The old woman sits down heavily and presses her palms against the earth as if asking it to hold her more firmly. Below them, the coast. The sea returns. Not gently. A sound first. Low. Not loud. More felt than heard. A vibration that enters through the soles of the feet and the base of the spine. Then the water, visible now as a line of white that shouldn't be there. A line that is moving not along the shore but toward it, fast, impossibly fast for something that large. It reaches the rock shelf where she was standing. It passes over it. The shellfish beds disappear. The beach disappears. The dune line absorbs the water like a sponge for one heartbeat, and then gives way, and the sea enters the coastal flat behind the dunes with a sound like tearing cloth. A ripping, rushing, grinding roar that carries sand and kelp and wood and anything else in its path. The shelter where they slept last night is below water. The fire is gone. She watches from the ridge. The child is in her arms. The child is crying, not from understanding, but from the contagion of adult fear, from the tight grip, from the strangeness of everything. She holds the child tighter. The water holds. The water holds. Then, slowly, it begins to pull back, dragging things with it, rearranging the coast, leaving a new geography behind. Driftwood piled in wrong places, sand where there was rock, rock where there was sand. The air smells of deep ocean, of things that belong on the seafloor. A cold, mineral, ancient smell. Silence. Not real silence. The surf is louder now, disordered, crashing without its usual rhythm. But human silence. No one speaks. They stand or sit on the high ground and watch the sea settle back into something resembling itself. The old woman's hands are still pressed against the earth. The fire is gone. They will need to make another. Someone already knows how. Someone always knows how. A hand drill. A shaft of hardwood spun between the palms against a softer hearthboard. The smell of friction. The first wisp of smoke. Then the ember, small and fragile as a heartbeat, cupped in dry grass and breathed into flame. Life begins again. It always begins again. Your own breath, right now. There it is. You didn't have to think about it. It just came. The way the ember catches. The way the next day starts. The way the species continues. Not because it's guaranteed. Because someone, every single time, chose to keep going. The stars come out. The same stars. Different positions, 70,000 years of stellar drift have rearranged the constellations slightly. But the same points of light, the same photons from the same thermonuclear furnaces, falling on the same retinas. She looks up. You look up. Or you would if your eyes were open. Maybe they are. Maybe they aren't. It doesn't matter. The stars are there whether you see them or not. They were there for her. They are there for you. The child falls asleep against her chest. The fire crackles. Somewhere, in the silt that will cover this night and compress it into a thin, unreadable layer of sediment. The only evidence of this evening's terror will be a slight change in the grain-sized distribution of the coastal deposits. A geologist, 70,000 years from now, will notice the anomaly. We'll write a paper about it. We'll never know about the woman on the ridge, the barnacles clicking in dry air, the child who cried. The gap holds its breath and continues. The sea still rises. Not in a single wave this time. Not with the dramatic violence of water crossing a rock shelf in seconds. This time, it rises the way a fever rises, slowly, steadily, almost imperceptibly, until one morning the marks you trusted are underwater and the shoreline you knew has become a memory. Since 1900, global sea levels have risen by roughly 20 centimeters. That sounds small. It is not small. It is the weight of an ocean shifting, the thermal expansion of water that has absorbed 90% of the excess heat trapped by greenhouse gases. The ice sheets of Greenland and West Antarctica are losing mass at rates that satellite measurements, precise to fractions of a millimeter, confirm are accelerating. The woman on the ridge watched the sea rearrange her coast in an afternoon. We are watching our coasts rearrange over decades. The tempo is different. The feeling, if you're honest, is not. That sense of wrongness. The sea pulling back too far. The wind stopping. Something in the pattern that doesn't match what you've been taught to expect. You know this feeling. You felt it reading a headline that made your stomach tighten. You felt it looking at a photograph of a glacier that used to be larger. You've felt it in the August heat that arrives in June now, that lingers into October, that smells like pavement and exhaust, and something faintly chemical that wasn't there when you were a child. Your alarm system, her alarm system, is ringing. The difference is that she could act on hers. She could walk to higher ground. She could read the signal, gather her people, and move. Her world was small enough to respond to. The threat was local. The solution was local. Feet on the ground, uphill now. Your threats are not local. The carbon in the atmosphere was put there by 8 billion people across 2 centuries of industrial activity. The microplastics in your bloodstream arrived through supply chains that span every ocean. The rent is due because of economic structures designed 300 years ago by men who never imagined a world of this many people. You cannot walk uphill from any of it, and yet the alarm rings. That's the mismatch. Your body is sending signals designed for a world where the threat could be outrun. You cannot outrun the modern world. So the alarm rings and rings and rings, and there is nowhere to go. And the word for that is anxiety. Feel your jaw. Is it clenched? Loosen it. Just for now. The echoes go deeper than climate. In the gap, humans lived in groups of 20 to 50. Everyone knew everyone. Social conflicts were resolved face to face, through negotiation, through ritual, through the ultimate sanction of walking away. If a group grew too large or too fractured, it split. 2 bands where there was one, each small enough to hold together by the gravity of personal relationship. There was no anonymity, no strangers, no abstract institutions standing between people and their consequences. Now look at tonight. You are lying in a structure built by people you've never met, on materials extracted from the earth, by people whose names you'll never know, in a city or a town governed by systems so complex that no single human being fully understands them. You interact daily with hundreds, maybe thousands of faces on screens, on streets, in the overlapping digital crowds of social media. And your brain, that ancient instrument calibrated for bands of 50, tries to process each one. It cannot. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar proposed that the human brain can maintain roughly 150 stable social relationships. This number, Dunbar's number, correlates with the size of the neocortex and appears again and again in human social structures. The size of Neolithic villages, of Roman military companies, of Christmas card lists, of the average person's active social network. 150. Your phone's contact list likely holds more names than that. Your social media may show you thousands of faces in an hour. Each one triggers the social processing circuits that evolved to manage a village. Circuits that assume every face is someone you might need to cooperate with, compete against, or care for. No wonder you're tired. The tiredness you feel tonight is not a personal failure. It is a species-wide mismatch between the machinery you were given and the world that machinery now inhabits. She knew everyone in her world. You know almost no one in yours. The warmth of the blanket against your skin. Just notice it. The weight. The texture. This is a small, real thing in a world of abstractions. The echoes are in the soil too. During the gap, humans ate between 80 and 120 different plant species in a given year, supplemented by wild game, shellfish, insects, and seasonal fruits. The nutritional variety was immense. The gut microbiome, that colony of trillions of bacteria that lives in your intestines and influences everything from your immune system to your mood, evolved in partnership with this diet. A diet of wild foods, high in fiber, low in simple sugars, rich in compounds that modern nutritional science is only beginning to catalog. The average modern diet in industrialized nations draws from roughly a dozen plant species. Wheat, rice, corn, soy, and sugar account for the vast majority of calories. The gut microbiome has not had time to adapt. 12,000 years, the span since agriculture began, is not enough evolutionary time for a meaningful shift in digestive biology. The result is not theoretical. It is measurable in rates of metabolic disease, in the thinning diversity of gut bacteria documented in studies comparing industrialized populations to the few remaining hunter-gatherer groups, in the quiet epidemic of inflammation that underlies conditions from depression to autoimmune disorders. Your body remembers the old diet. It asks for it in cravings you can't quite name. The craving for something that isn't sweet or salty or processed, something your tongue recognizes but your pantry doesn't contain. The fire crackles. The echoes are everywhere. In the gap, humans slept with the dark. No artificial light. The body's circadian rhythm, that same grain of rice behind the eyes, tracked the sun without interference. Melatonin rose with dusk and fell with dawn. Sleep came in two phases. A first sleep, a period of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night, and a second sleep. This pattern, documented by the historian Roger Kirch in pre-industrial European records, appears to be the biological default. You are awake right now, perhaps, in the blue light of screen. Or you were, recently, before you press play on this. The photoreceptors in your retina, specifically the melanopsin-containing intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, a name too long for this hour, are tuned to detect blue light. When they detect it, they send a signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus that says, "It is daytime." Suppress melatonin. Stay alert. Your phone is a small son. You brought it to bed. She would not have understood the object, but she would have understood the problem. A light that won't go out, a mind that won't quiet, a body caught between rest and vigilance. Her solution was simpler. When the light left, the world told her to sleep. And she did. You're not broken. That needs to be said before anything else in this beat. Whatever brought you here tonight, the inability to sleep, the weight that sits on your chest, the thoughts that circle like birds that won't land, you're not broken. You are a perfectly calibrated instrument playing in the wrong orchestra. The human body, your body, the one you're lying in right now, was assembled by 300,000 years of field testing in a world that no longer exists. Every system in it was optimized for conditions that ended, historically speaking, 5 minutes ago. Your stress response, the cascade of cortisol and adrenaline that tightens your chest and shortens your breath and sends your thoughts racing, was designed for threats that lasted minutes. A predator, a rival, a storm. The hormones would flood your system, sharpen your senses, prepare your muscles, and then, when the threat was over, dissipate. The system was built with an off switch. The off switch was safety. The physical, felt sensation of danger passing. The predator leaves. The rival backs down. The storm blows through. Now the threats don't leave. The email doesn't resolve. The debt doesn't disappear. The news cycle doesn't end. The algorithm feeds you another reason to worry, and another, and another. And your cortisol has no off switch because the danger never physically passes through and out the other side. The system is working perfectly. It's the inputs that have changed. The air against your face right now. Cool or warm. Dry or damp. Just notice it. This mismatch runs through everything. Your feet. They evolved to walk on uneven ground. Soil, rock, sand, root-crossed forest floors. The bones of your foot contain 26 separate bones, 33 joints, and over 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments, all designed to flex, grip, and adjust to irregular surfaces. They are an engineering marvel of adaptation. You put them in shoes and stand them on concrete. The foot flattens. The muscles weaken. The proprioceptive feedback, the constant conversation between your feet and your brain about where you are in space, goes quiet. And something in your balance, your posture, your relationship with gravity itself, subtly degrades. She walked barefoot her entire life. On sand, on rock, on wet grass, on soil still warm from the afternoon sun. Her feet were her first and most constant tool. Your feet are in socks, or under a blanket. They still know what they're for. Your eyes. They evolved to scan wide horizons and track movement at great distances. The muscles that focus your lens were designed to shift constantly between near and far, relaxing on the distance, tightening on the close. That rhythm of focus and release was the visual default for the entire gap. The result is an epidemic of myopia that tracks, almost perfectly, with the hours per day a population spends on close-focus work. In some East Asian cities, where screen time and study hours are highest, myopia rates among young adults exceed 90%. 90%. Her eyes could track a raptor half a mile away. She could read the surface of the sea for fish movement. She could spot edible plants in a field of green that would look uniform to your overtrained, under-traveled gaze. Your eyes are older than your habits. Everything about you is. Your social brain, the one that craves belonging, that monitors status, that feels rejection as physical pain, because in the gap, rejection from the group was a death sentence. Alone on the savannah, you died. The brain made sure you felt it, made sure the pain of exclusion was as real and as urgent as a broken bone. That circuit still fires. When someone doesn't reply to your message, when the group chat goes quiet, when you see others gathering without you, the brain reads it as mortal danger because for 290,000 years, it was. You're not being dramatic when social exclusion hurts. You're being human. The oldest kind of human. A breath. Just one. Let out slowly. The mismatch is not your fault. You did not design this world. You were born into it. The way she was born into hers, without consent, without preparation, armed only with the body your ancestors built for a world that had already changed. The difference is that her world changed slowly, generation by generation. A shift in rainfall over centuries. A gradual cooling that pushed the tree line south over millennia. Slow enough that the body and the culture could adapt in tandem. Your world changed in a single lifetime. Your grandparents, if they are still alive, were born into a world without smartphones, without social media, without constant connectivity. Some were born into a world without television. The body they passed to your parents, and your parents passed to you, was the same body that walked the southern coast of Africa 70,000 years ago. Nothing has changed inside. Everything has changed outside. The mismatch is the space between those two facts. And lying here, in the dark, letting the day go, this is one of the few things you can do that your body actually recognizes. Darkness. Stillness. A voice in the dark. These are the original conditions. The ones the system was built for. You're not doing something indulgent right now. You're doing something ancient. But here is the part the mismatch leaves out. The part that matters more than the problem. You're still here. Not you, personally. Though yes, you are, and that's not nothing. But you, the species. The lineage. The unbroken thread. 300,000 years. At minimum. The chain of breath and birth and survival that connects you, tonight, to the first Homo sapiens who looked up at a sky full of stars and felt something they couldn't name. Every catastrophe described in this story, the bottlenecks, the volcanic winters, the tsunamis, the droughts that lasted generations, every single one of them was survived. Not by the strongest, not by the fastest, not by the most intelligent individual in the group. By the group. By the fact that humans cooperate. This is not a platitude. It is a measurable, documentable, evolutionary fact. Humans are the most cooperative species on the planet that is not eusocial. Not ants, not bees, not termites with their genetically enforced caste systems. Humans cooperate voluntarily, flexibly, across genetic lines, with strangers. No other primate does this. Chimpanzees cooperate, but only within established hierarchies and with individuals they already know. Bonobos cooperate, but primarily through sexual bonding. Gorillas cooperate within single male family units. Humans cooperate with people they met last week. This is extraordinary. The mechanism is trust. And trust, in the gap, was built the same way it's built now. Through repeated interaction, through shared vulnerability, through the slow accumulation of moments in which someone could have betrayed you and didn't. The fire at night. Shared food. A hand extended to help someone up a slope. A child held while its mother sleeps. A story told. Not because it contains survival information, though it might, but because the act of telling and listening creates a bond that is itself a survival tool. Story is technology. The oldest technology. Older than the hand axe. Older than fire keeping. Older, perhaps, than language itself. If we allow that the first stories might have been gestures, expressions, enacted sequences of movement that conveyed meaning before mouths could shape words. You're using this technology right now. A voice is telling you a story in the dark, and something in your nervous system, something very, very old, is responding to that by softening, by trusting, by letting go, just slightly, of the vigilance that keeps you awake. That softening is the same mechanism that held bands of 20 together through ice ages. It is the same mechanism that allowed strangers to meet at a waterhole and share rather than fight. It is the same mechanism that let a child fall asleep against its mother's chest while the world roared below the ridge. You have not lost it. It has not atrophied. It is happening in your body right now. The woman on the ridge lost her shelter. She lost her fire. She lost, perhaps, possessions that we would never recognize as possessions because they were made of grass and hide and wood. But she did not lose her group, and she did not lose the knowledge in her head, or the steadiness in her hands, or the capacity to look at a broken situation and begin, quietly, to rebuild. The hand drill, the hearthboard, the friction, the smoke, the ember, the fire comes back. It always comes back. Not because fire is guaranteed. Because someone, every time, knows how to make it. And someone else shields it from the wind. And someone else feeds the first dry grass. And the group, together, does what no individual could. This is the secret the gap teaches, if you let it. Not that the world is fragile. You already know that. But that you come from people who lived in a fragile world for 250,000 years and did not break. You are not starting from zero. You never were. You come from people who kept the fire going when the sea took everything else. That counts. It counts more than you know. Let the story go quiet now. Not silent. Quiet. The way a field goes quiet after rain. Still alive, still breathing, but resting. We've come a long way tonight. Across 300,000 years. Across ice ages and warm spells. Across coastlines that no longer exist and fires that burned out before the invention of memory. We followed a woman up a ridge while the sea swallowed her home. We watched her rebuild. Now let's step back. Further back than her. Further back than Jebel Irhoud. Further back than the first flaked stone or the first word spoken in the dark. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. That number means nothing to the human brain. It is too large. It slides off the mind the way water slides off stone. So let's make it smaller. Compress the entire history of Earth into a single 24-hour day. Midnight to midnight. At midnight, the planet forms, a ball of molten rock and metal, glowing in the dark, too hot to touch, too violent to hold anything we'd call life. By 4 a.m, the first simple cells appear. Bacteria. Single-celled organisms that will dominate the planet for the next 16 hours of this compressed day. Let that settle. Bacteria run the show from 4 a.m. to 8 p.m. Almost the entire day. Almost the entire history of life on Earth belongs to organisms you cannot see without a microscope. Complex cells, the kind with a nucleus, the kind your body is made of, don't appear until around 2 in the afternoon. The first animals with hard bodies, things that leave fossils, arrive around 8:40 in the evening. Dinosaurs appear at roughly 10:40 p.m. They're gone by 11:39. The earliest members of our genus, Homo, show up around 11:58 and 43 seconds. And everything we call human civilization, every city, every book, every war, every song, every empire that rose and crumbled, every love letter, every gravestone, all of it fits into the final fraction of the last second before midnight. Less than a blink. You're that blink. This is not meant to make you feel small. It is meant to make you feel light. The weight you carry, the worry, the responsibility, the private fear that you're not doing enough, not being enough, not keeping up, that weight is real. It sits on your chest, and you feel it every day. No one is telling you it isn't there. But it is temporary, not in the dismissive sense. Not in the way people say this too shall pass, when they want you to stop complaining. Temporary in the geological sense, in the deep time sense, in the sense that the limestone cliffs of Jebel Irhoud were once the bottom of a sea, and the sea became stone, and the stone became a hillside, and the hillside held the oldest known face of our species for 300,000 years, until a mining crew broke through it looking for something else entirely. Everything changes. Everything has always changed. The continents move. The ice advances and retreats. Species arrive and vanish. The atoms in your body were forged in stars that exploded before the sun existed. The iron in your blood, the same element that gives ochre its red, was made in the heart of a dying star, scattered into a nebula, gathered by gravity into a new solar system, incorporated into a rocky planet, dissolved into water, absorbed by plants, eaten by animals, passed through a chain of living things so long and so improbable that the odds of it arriving in your bloodstream, tonight, are effectively zero. And yet here it is. Here you are. The improbability of your existence is not a burden. It is the opposite. It means that nothing about you is inevitable. Nothing about you is guaranteed. You are not the product of a plan. You are the product of persistence, of atoms and cells and creatures, and people who kept going when they had every statistical reason to stop. The stars that made your iron don't care whether you finish your to-do list. The limestone doesn't care whether you answer that email. The gap, those 290,000 years of humans living and dying without a single written record, doesn't care whether you are productive tomorrow. It cares, if stone can care, that you rest. The planet turns beneath you. Slowly. You can't feel it, but it's there. One full rotation every 23 hours and 56 minutes. The same rotation that spun beneath the woman on the ridge. The same rotation that spun beneath the first bacterium at 4 in the morning of Earth's long day. You are on a rock, turning in the dark, surrounded by silence that stretches for light years in every direction. And you are warm, and you are breathing. That is enough. For right now, in this moment, that is enough. Consider what it took to get you here. Not philosophically, practically, biologically. The chain of events that had to occur in sequence, without a single break, for you to exist in this specific body, in this specific moment, hearing these specific words. Start with a woman on the ridge. She survived. That's established. She carried a child up a slope while the sea tore apart the coast below. She watched the fire die. She helped rebuild it. She slept that night on unfamiliar ground, with the sound of a disordered ocean below and the smell of wet ash on the wind. She woke the next morning, and the morning after, and the one after that. At some point, weeks later, months, years, she had another child. Or the child she carried survived to adulthood and had children of their own. We know this because the genetic lineage continued. The mitochondrial DNA that passes from mother to child, unchanged except by mutation, was passed on. The line held. That child grew, learned the paths, learned the water, learned the tides and the plants, and the way a shrike calls differently when a snake is near. Grew old enough to teach what they knew. Grew old enough to hold someone else's child while the world misbehaved. And their child, and their child's child, generation after generation, through the rest of the gap, through the last ice age, when the sea dropped so far that you could walk from Africa to Arabia, from Siberia to Alaska, from mainland Asia to the islands of Indonesia, through the warming that followed, when the ice melted and the seas rose and entire landscapes disappeared beneath water that has not retreated since, through the first experiments with planting seeds, through the first permanent villages, through the first epidemics, the terrible gift of living close to animals, the exchange of pathogens that killed millions and shaped the immune system you carry tonight, through bronze, through iron, through empire, through plague, through famine, through every war whose name you learned in school, and the thousands whose names were never recorded. Someone survived. Every single time. Not everyone. That's the honest part. Not everyone made it. The gap is full of people who didn't, whose lineages ended in a drought, a disease, a childbirth that went wrong, a fall from a cliff, a bite from a snake, a winter that lasted too long. The dead outnumber the living by a margin so vast it has no meaningful ratio. But your line held. Your specific, particular, unrepeatable line. The odds of this are not calculable, not in any meaningful sense. The number of contingencies, the right person meeting the right person, the rain falling at the right time, the predator turning left instead of right, the infant surviving its first winter, the teenager not drowning in the river crossing. The number of things that had to go right in sequence across 300,000 years is a number that would fill more pages than exist. And here you are, not as a triumph, not as a trophy, just as a fact, a quiet, breathing, impossible fact, lying in the dark with your eyes closed or closing. The calcium in your bones was in their bones. The same calcium, recycled through soil and water and root and marrow across millennia. The carbon in your breath was in their breath. The atoms are old. The arrangement is new. You are the latest draft of a document that has been continuously edited for 300,000 years. No draft is final. No draft needs to be. You are not the point of the story. You are a paragraph in it. A paragraph that matters. Not because it concludes anything, but because it exists. Because it's being written right now, in the dark, in the rhythm of your breathing. The woman on the ridge didn't know you would exist. She couldn't imagine you. The concept of the future at the scale that separated her from you would have been as incomprehensible to her as the deep past is to you. But she did the thing that made you possible. She kept going. She fed the child. She rebuilt the fire. She slept and woke and carried the knowledge forward one more day. Not for you, for the morning. That was always enough. The fire in your chest, that small coal we placed there earlier, it's still there. It doesn't need to be bright. It doesn't need to be useful. It just needs to be warm. It is. You are the fire's latest keeping. Someone will carry it after you. Let go now. All of it. The history, the data, the names and the dates and the theories. Let the gap close over them like water closing over stone. You don't need to carry any of it tonight. Your only task right now is rest. The room you're in is safe. The air is reaching your lungs without effort. Your heart is beating at the same rhythm it has kept since before you were born. Somewhere on the other side of the world, someone else is listening to this. Morning there, maybe, night here. The planet turns, and both of you are on it, and neither of you is alone. If this helped you tonight, come back. Subscribe if you want. Leave a comment. Tell me what time is where you are, and what the air feels like outside your window. I read them. They matter. But not now. Now is for sleep. The stars are out. The fire is low. The ridge is quiet. And somewhere in the dark of a shallow cave on a coast that the sea has long since reclaimed, the smell of ochre, ground into paste, mixed with fat, pressed to stone by careful fingers, lingers in a place where no one will find it for 100,000 years. It smells like iron. It smells like earth. It smells like someone was here. Sleep now. You were here too.